Hello friend, welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we're going to spend some time with one of the smallest and most remarkable tools in the animal world, whiskers. They are easy to overlook. They rest quietly on the face of a cat, a mouse, a fox, or a seal. And because they are so familiar, they can seem simple. It also raises a quietly funny question. If cats have whiskers, and mice have whiskers, and foxes have whiskers, and seals have whiskers too, then what exactly is going on here? Are all these animals part of some secret whisker club? Or is this one of those useful ideas evolution kept returning to again and again? That gentle little mystery is part of what makes whiskers so interesting. And later tonight, we'll take some time to understand why so many mammals ended up carrying these fine sensory hairs into such different lives. Just a few stiff hairs, just a small detail, just part of the face. But whiskers are much more than that. They are one of the ways animals feel the world before they fully see it. They help with distance, movement, texture, space, and direction. They help animals move through dark places, narrow places, hidden places, and shifting places. They help turn the nearby world into something that can be sensed with surprising care. And the more closely you look at whiskers, the stranger and more beautiful they become. For example, whiskers do not really sense the world along the visible hair itself. The important part is not the tip, it is the root. Deep at the base of the whisker, under the skin, there is a highly sensitive structure filled with nerves. When the whisker bends even a little, that movement is detected at the root, and the animal's brain begins turning that tiny motion into useful information. So in a way, a whisker is less like an ordinary hair and more like a small lever. It reaches outward into the world, and the body quietly reads what happens at its base. That alone is already a little surprising. But whiskers become even more interesting when we look at how some animals actually use them. Rats and mice, for instance, do not simply wait for their whiskers to bump into things. They actively move them back and forth again and again in a quick, gentle rhythm, almost like they are scanning the space around them. In darkness, in tunnels, near walls, and around corners, that motion helps them gather information about the world nearby. It is a kind of touch, but it is also a kind of searching. That means a small animal does not always move into the world blindly and then react. Sometimes it reaches outward first. Sometimes it samples the space ahead. Sometimes it builds a picture of nearby surfaces through tiny movements that happen so quickly we may never notice them at all. And then there are seals. In water, whiskers can do something that feels almost unbelievable. A seal can use its whiskers to detect subtle disturbances left behind by something that moved through the water earlier. In other words, the water holds a trail, and the whiskers help read it. That means a whisker is not only sensing direct contact. In some cases, it is sensing a faint pattern in the world, a trace of motion that lingers just long enough to be found. That is part of what makes whiskers such a beautiful topic. They seem ordinary at first, and then very quickly they stop feeling ordinary at all. A whisker can help a cat judge a gap in low light. It can help a mouse move through a narrow opening. It can help a seal notice what passed silently through dark water. And all of that can happen through something so fine and light that it barely seems like it should matter. So tonight, whiskers will slowly stop seeming like a tiny extra detail on the face of an animal. They will begin to feel more like a soft boundary between body and world. A cat walking through a dim hallway, a mouse pausing at the mouth of a tunnel, a seal drifting through cold water. Each one is meeting the world not only with eyes and ears, but with these fine, sensitive tools reaching quietly outward. There is something very peaceful about that. Not because whiskers are simple, but because they remind us that life is full of quiet forms of attention. Not every sense arrives in a dramatic way. Not every tool is large or obvious. Sometimes a thin hair at the edge of the face can tell an animal whether a space is safe, whether something has moved nearby, or whether the world has shifted ever so slightly. And maybe that is part of why whiskers are so memorable. They sit right at the edge of the face, where the body meets the world. They are small, but they extend awareness just a little farther. Just enough to turn uncertainty into guidance. Just enough to make movement softer, safer, and more precise. By the end of tonight, whiskers may feel less like decoration and more like one of nature's quiet inventions. Something simple in appearance, something delicate in form, and yet something powerful enough to help an animal feel the shape of the world before it fully appears. A whisker may look like an ordinary hair at first. It is thin. It grows from the skin. It can bend. It can fall out and grow back. If you only glance at it, it may not seem very different from the fur around it. But a whisker is not just a longer version of normal hair. It is a special kind of hair built for sensing. The scientific name for a whisker is often vibrissa. The plural is vibrissae. That word is not one most people use in daily life, and that is perfectly fine. Whisker is simpler, warmer, and easier to picture. But the scientific word helps show that these hairs belong to a more specialized system. Ordinary fur mostly helps with things like warmth, protection, and covering the body. Fur can also help with camouflage or display, depending on the animal. But whiskers have a different main job. Their role is to gather information. That difference begins with the way they are built. Whiskers are usually thicker and stiffer than the nearby hairs around them. They tend to stand out from the coat instead of blending into it. They are often longer too, especially on the face, where they can reach outward into the space around an animal. That matters, because a whisker is most useful when it can meet the world before the face or body does. If a cat is moving toward the side of a chair, or a mouse is slipping through a narrow space, the whiskers may brush the edge first. That early contact gives the animal a small warning and a small clue. It says, in a way, something is here. Something is close. Pay attention. And while ordinary hairs can move in the wind or flatten when touched, whiskers are more strongly tied to deep sensory structures beneath the skin. So even though the visible part looks simple, the whole system is much more specialized than it appears. Another important thing about whiskers is where they grow. Many people think only of the long whiskers on the muzzle, especially when picturing a cat. Those are certainly the most famous ones. But whiskers can appear in several places on the face and sometimes in other areas too, depending on the animal. Some sit above the eyes, some grow on the cheeks, some are found near the chin. In certain mammals, special whiskers can even appear near the wrist area of the front legs. This tells us something important right away. Whiskers are not placed randomly. They tend to appear in spots where extra information would be useful. Near the mouth, they can help judge nearby surfaces. Above the eyes, they can help protect the face and notice contact from above. In other places, they may help the animal sense body position or the shape of its surroundings. So a whisker is not simply a hair that happens to be long. It is a hair placed with purpose. There is also a certain shape to many whiskers that helps them do their job. They are often tapered, meaning they are thicker near the base and narrower toward the tip. That shape helps them stay light and flexible while still being strong enough to transmit tiny movements back to the root. That is one of the quiet marvels of whiskers. They are firm, but not rigid. They are light, but not weak. They are delicate enough to move with small forces, yet stable enough to carry useful information back into the body. And that is really what makes a whisker different from the rest of an animal's coat. It is not there just to exist on the outside. It is there to connect the outside world to the nervous system. Seen that way, a whisker begins to feel less like part of an animal's appearance and more like part of its awareness. It is a sensory tool growing from the skin, a fine extension of the body, a way for the world to press gently against an animal and be noticed. That idea may make whiskers seem a little more alive than they did before. Not alive on their own, of course, but active in purpose. They are built to receive, built to respond, built to help an animal know what is close. And once we understand that, the next question begins to feel even more interesting. If whiskers are such specialized tools, what is happening beneath the skin that makes them so sensitive? When we look at a whisker, we only see the quiet outer part. We see the long hair reaching away from the face. We see it curve gently in the light. We see it move when an animal turns its head or brushes past something nearby. It can seem simple from the outside, almost delicate enough to ignore. But the most important part of a whisker is the part we cannot see. The true sensitivity of a whisker lies beneath the skin, at its base. That is where the whisker is anchored inside a special structure called a follicle. Hair also grows from follicles, of course, but a whisker follicle is much more developed and much more sensitive than the follicles that hold ordinary fur. It is built not just to hold a hair in place, but to detect tiny changes in movement. That difference changes everything. If a normal hair shifts slightly, that may not mean very much. But if a whisker shifts, even by a small amount, the animal's body is prepared to notice. Around the base of the whisker are many nerve endings. These nerves are there to detect pressure, movement, and bending. When the whisker is pushed by a surface, or stirred by moving air, or bent as the animal passes close to an object, that change is transferred down to the base. The follicle then helps turn that small physical event into a signal the nervous system can understand. So even though the whisker itself reaches outward into the world, the sensing is happening deeper in the skin. This is one of the easiest ways to picture it. The whisker is like the visible arm of the system, but the root is where the message is received. That is why it is not quite right to think of a whisker as feeling at the tip. The tip helps meet the world, but the real detection happens where the whisker enters the skin and connects to all that hidden sensitivity below. There is also something else that makes the whisker root unusual. The follicle is not just surrounded by nerves. It is also supported by specialized tissue, including blood-filled spaces that help make the system even more responsive. That may sound surprising at first, but it makes sense. If a structure is meant to detect very tiny movements, it helps for that structure to be supported in a way that allows fine mechanical changes to be noticed clearly. In other words, the base of the whisker is not hard and dead like a pin stuck into wood. It is part of a living sensory system, soft enough to receive movement, sensitive enough to register it, connected enough to pass that information along. That is part of what makes whiskers so remarkable. They are not simply attached to an animal. They are integrated into the body in a very active way. And because of that, a whisker can work almost like a small lever. When the outer part bends, the base experiences that force. A tiny movement far from the skin becomes a readable event at the root. That gives the animal a way to notice things just outside the surface of its body. A wall, a branch, a narrow opening, a ripple in the water, a change in the air. All of those things can create a slight bend in a whisker, and that bend can become information. It is a quiet process and a very fast one. There is no need for an animal to stop and think about it in the way we might think through a math problem or a set of directions. The body is already prepared. The whisker moves, the follicle responds, the nerves send their message, and the animal receives a small update about the world. That update might be simple. Something is close. Something moved. Something changed. But simple information can be very powerful when it arrives at the right time, especially in darkness, especially in a tight space, especially when speed matters. And maybe that is one of the most beautiful things about whiskers. Their sensitivity is hidden. The visible part looks plain enough, but under the skin, there is a carefully built system ready to turn tiny motions into awareness. So when a cat pauses beside a table leg, or a mouse slips through a narrow opening, or a seal drifts through dark water, there is more happening than a few hairs brushing the world. There is a quiet conversation between body and environment, a small movement outside, a signal rising inside, a living system translating touch into knowledge. And once that hidden sensitivity is in place, another gentle question begins to rise. How does a tiny bend at the root of a whisker become something meaningful, like shape, distance, texture, or motion? Once a whisker has moved, the story is only beginning. A surface brushes against it. A wall comes a little too close. A small current of air shifts near the face. Somewhere outside the body, something causes the whisker to bend. That bend may be tiny, almost too small to imagine. But inside the animal, it matters. Because a whisker does not only move, it sends news. The first part of that news begins at the root, where the follicle and its nerves detect the motion. But for that motion to become useful, the body has to do more than notice that something happened. It has to begin answering quiet questions. How strong was the bend? Which direction did it come from? Did it happen once or several times in a row? Did one whisker move or many? Was the contact light and brief, or firm and lasting? These details help turn a simple physical event into information about the outside world. If a whisker bends forward, that may mean an object is in front of the face. If it bends to one side, that can help show where the object is located. If several whiskers bend together, the animal may be gathering a broader sense of shape or position. If the movement is slight and repeated, it may suggest a textured surface, a moving current, or a nearby object being sampled again and again. This is part of what makes whiskers so elegant. They do not deliver a full picture all at once. They gather small clues, and the brain begins putting those clues together. In that way, whisker sensing is a little like reading the edge of the world one touch at a time. Not all at once, not in a grand sweeping image, but through many tiny moments of contact and movement, each one adding something. A narrow opening, a rough surface, a curved edge, a space wide enough to pass through, a surface close to the eye, a body moving nearby. Each clue is small, but together they become guidance. That guidance is especially useful because whiskers work at close range, where mistakes matter. An animal does not need a whisker to tell it about a mountain far away or a cloud across the sky. Other senses are better for that. Whiskers are for the nearby world, the immediate world, the world of corners, branches, walls, roots, prey, obstacles, and openings. They are part of how an animal moves with care, and that movement can happen very quickly. There is no need for a long pause between contact and understanding. The whisker bends, the signal travels, and the body responds. A head may turn slightly. A step may change. A gap may be judged. A body may slow, stop, crouch, or continue forward. In many cases, this happens so smoothly that it does not even look like a special event from the outside. It just looks like an animal moving naturally. But natural movement is often full of hidden precision. A cat slipping past furniture without bumping into it. A mouse tracing the edge of a wall. A seal turning through dark water. Each movement may be supported by countless small sensory updates, many of them arriving through whiskers. Another important part of whisker sensing is repetition. One single touch can help, of course, but repeated contact can make the outside world even clearer. If a whisker brushes the same surface more than once, or if an animal moves its whiskers back and forth while exploring, the brain can compare those repeated signals. That helps build a steadier sense of shape, distance, and layout. So whiskers are not only about detecting presence. They are also about refining understanding. They let an animal move from something is here to something is here. It is close. It curves this way. It feels like this, and I can move safely around it. That may sound like a lot to ask from a few hairs on the face, but that is only because whiskers seem so modest at first. The truth is that whiskers are not impressive because they are large. They are impressive because they are precise. They take tiny bits of physical contact and turn them into useful knowledge. They help the outside world become readable. And they do this quietly, constantly, and without drawing attention to themselves. That is why whiskers begin to feel less like decoration the longer we stay with them. They are tools of interpretation, small instruments for understanding what is near, soft translators between movement and meaning, and perhaps that is what makes them so calming to think about. They remind us that information does not always arrive in loud or dramatic ways. Sometimes knowledge begins with the lightest bend, the gentlest pressure, the smallest sign that something is there. And once that process is understood, it becomes easier to appreciate the animal most people think of first. when they picture whiskers at all. Because in the quiet face of a cat, this whole system becomes visible in one of its most familiar forms. For many people, whiskers mean one thing right away: a cat, not a seal drifting through dark water, and not a mouse feeling its way through a tunnel, but the quiet face of a cat sitting in a window, walking down a hallway, or resting with its paws tucked neatly beneath its body. Cat whiskers are among the most familiar whiskers in the world. Even people who know very little about animal senses tend to notice them. They stand out clearly against the face. They catch the light. They give the cat a certain look of alertness, softness, and attention. And yet, even though they are so familiar, they are often not fully understood. Many people think of cat whiskers as expressive, and they are. Many people also think of them as decorative, which is understandable, because they do add to the shape and beauty of the face. But for the cat, whiskers are not there just to complete a look. They are working tools. The most famous cat whiskers are the long ones growing from the muzzle, arranged in neat rows on each side of the face. These are often the first whiskers we notice, and they are the ones most people picture when they imagine a cat moving through the world. Placed there, they are in an especially useful position. The muzzle is close to where a cat meets things first. When a cat leans toward a gap, a surface, a toy, a piece of furniture, or potential prey, the whiskers can gather information before the face presses any farther forward. They help the cat sense what is near at the very distance where good judgment matters most. That makes them valuable in a very practical way. A cat often moves with quiet precision. It slips around corners. It passes chair legs without trouble. It threads itself through narrow spaces with surprising ease. It can approach objects in low light, pause, and decide how to move next. Some of that grace comes from balance, body control, vision, and hearing. But whiskers help too. They provide the cat with close-up information about the shape of the space ahead. This is especially helpful because cats are often active in dim conditions. They are well known for moving confidently in low light. And while their eyes are very important in those moments, whiskers add another layer of awareness. In a dark room, under furniture, near the floor, beside a wall, or around a tight opening, whiskers help provide small updates about nearness and contact. They are part of the cat's short-range guidance system. A cat does not need whiskers to notice a lamp across the room. Its eyes can do that. But a whisker becomes useful when the question is smaller and closer. How near is this surface? Is there enough room here? What is just beside my face? Did something move right in front of me? Those are the kinds of questions whiskers are good at helping answer. They are also important during hunting. Cats are predators, and predators often need precise information at close range. A moving animal may dart suddenly. A surface may shift beneath the paws. Something alive may be near the mouth or within reach of the front legs. At that point, the world is no longer about broad scenery. It is about exact position, exact timing, exact movement. Whiskers help make that close world clearer. They can help a cat judge position during the final moments of approach, when what matters is not the larger room, but the very small space where body meets body, paw meets object, or face meets motion. There is another reason cat whiskers are so noticeable to us. They sit on a face that already seems expressive. Cats can look curious, calm, annoyed, sleepy, tense, or interested with only the smallest change in posture. Their whiskers add to that effect. When whiskers angle forward, a cat may seem alert or focused. When they draw back, the face can appear more guarded or uneasy. Even without fully understanding the science, people often sense that whiskers are part of the cat's shifting mood. So cat whiskers do two things at once. They help the cat sense the world, and they help us read the cat. That may be part of why they feel so memorable. We see them as both useful and expressive, both practical and beautiful. They belong to the cat's sensory life, but they also shape the face we have come to recognize so easily. And yet, even on a cat, the muzzle does not tell the whole whisker story. Because once we look more closely, we begin to see that whiskers are not limited to those famous rows beside the nose. There are other whiskers too, placed in quieter positions, each adding something to the animal's awareness. Once you stop looking only at the muzzle, the whiskered map of an animal begins to widen. The long whiskers at the sides of the nose are the ones most people notice first. They are the easiest to see, and they are often the most dramatic. On a cat, they arc outward from the face like fine white lines. On a mouse, they tremble near the edges of a tunnel. On a seal, they stand ready at the front of the muzzle. These are the whiskers that usually come to mind when we picture the word, but they are not the whole story. In many mammals, whiskers appear in several other places too, and each group can help gather a different kind of information. Once you begin to notice them, the face stops looking like it has one set of sensory hairs and starts looking more like a small network. One of the clearest examples is the group of whiskers above the eyes. These are sometimes less obvious than the big muzzle whiskers, but they matter. Because of where they sit, they are well placed to detect things coming from above or near the upper part of the face. A low branch, a narrow surface, the edge of an opening, or some nearby contact in the dark may be noticed there before it presses directly against the eye area. That makes these whiskers especially useful in a simple, protective way. Eyes are delicate. Anything that gives an animal a little warning near the eyes can be helpful. A whisker above the eye can act like an early signal, a light notice that something is close in a place where caution matters. There are also smaller whiskers around the chin and cheeks. These may not stand out as much to us, but they add to the animal's close-range awareness. Around the mouth and lower face, they can help an animal sense what is just below or just in front of the head. That may be useful during movement, feeding, grooming, or close inspection of objects. In a way, they help fill in the near space around the front of the face, so sensing does not depend on just one row of long hairs at the muzzle. This wider pattern begins to show something important. Whiskers are not simply decoration placed in one pretty cluster. They are arranged where information is likely to matter. And in some mammals, the whisker story reaches even farther than the face. A good example is the carpal whisker, found near the wrist region of the front leg in certain animals, including cats and some other mammals. This placement may seem surprising at first. We are so used to thinking of whiskers as part of the face that the idea of one near the leg can sound unusual. But it makes sense. The front legs are often deeply involved in how an animal meets the world. They step, reach, hold, and make contact. For a predator, the front limbs may be used to pin or grasp prey. For other animals, the front feet are constantly helping test the ground, edges, and nearby surfaces. A sensory hair near that region can add one more small stream of information where close awareness is useful. So the whisker system is often more spread out than people realize. There may be whiskers near the eyes, whiskers near the cheeks, whiskers near the chin, whiskers near the mouth, and in some cases, whiskers near the forelimbs. That arrangement suggests that whiskers are not all doing exactly the same thing. Some may be especially helpful for sensing what lies ahead. Some may help protect delicate regions of the face. Some may contribute to feeding, hunting, or close inspection. Some may help with body position or contact near the limbs. The details vary by species, of course. Not every animal carries the same arrangement, and not every whisker is equally long or equally important in every moment. But the larger pattern stays clear. Whiskers are often placed in useful positions around the body, not gathered into one simple patch for one narrow purpose. That is part of what makes them so elegant. They are not excessive. They are economical. A few fine hairs placed in the right spots can extend awareness in several directions at once. They do not need to cover the entire body. They only need to appear where an extra warning, signal, or clue would make movement safer and more precise. The more we look at whiskers this way, the more they begin to feel like a quiet map of sensory priorities. Where does this animal most need advance notice? Where is contact most delicate? Where would a little extra information make the biggest difference? The body answers those questions with placement. And once you notice that, whiskers stop feeling like a single feature and start feeling like part of a wider sensory design. This wider arrangement suggests that whiskers are not just about one task. They are part of a broader sensory strategy. And that strategy becomes especially important when the world grows dim, hidden, or hard to see. In darkness, animals do not stop moving. They simply rely more heavily on the senses that remain dependable when vision begins to fade. For humans, darkness often feels like a kind of absence. The room is still there, of course, but less of it reaches us clearly. Edges soften. Distances become uncertain. Small objects disappear first. A chair, a doorway, a wall, or a branch may still exist exactly where it was before, but without enough light, the world becomes harder to read. For many animals, that problem is familiar. Some are active at dawn or dusk, when light is gentle and incomplete. Some move at night. Some live underground, in burrows or tunnels where sight is limited from the start. Others pass through thick grass, dense brush, hollow logs, tight crevices, or cluttered spaces where clear vision is not always possible, even in daytime. And in all of those places, whiskers become especially useful. That is because whiskers do not depend on light. They do not need brightness, color, or a clear line of sight. They work through contact and nearness. They help an animal sense what is close, what is shifting, what is brushing against the edge of the body, and what lies just ahead of the face. In a way, whiskers are perfect for the nearby world. When sight becomes uncertain, the world does not vanish all at once. It simply becomes less reliable at a distance. But close-range information still matters very much. A wall is still close. A branch is still near the eye. A narrow opening is still either wide enough or too tight. A step is still either safe or awkward. Whiskers help answer those small but important questions. That is why they are so valuable in dim places. A cat moving through a dark room may not need whiskers to understand the whole room at once. Its eyes and memory help with that too. But whiskers can add delicate updates at close range. They can help the cat know when it is near the leg of a table, the side of a wall, the edge of a doorway, or the corner of a piece of furniture. They make the nearby world feel less sudden. For a mouse or rat, the usefulness may be even more obvious. A small animal moving through a tunnel or along the edge of a wall lives in a world full of tight spaces. Vision can help, but touch becomes especially important. The sides of a burrow, the mouth of an opening, the contour of a passage, the roughness of a surface, all of these are things whiskers can help read. In that setting, whiskers are not just a nice extra. They are part of how movement stays accurate. And accuracy matters. In darkness, a bad guess can lead to a bump, a hesitation, a wrong turn, or unnecessary noise. For prey animals, that can be dangerous. For predators, it can mean losing a chance to approach quietly. For any animal, awkward movement wastes energy and increases risk. Whiskers help reduce those mistakes. They do not make an animal all-knowing. They do not replace sight, hearing, or smell. But they provide something steady and dependable when the visual world becomes incomplete. They let the body gather direct information from the space just around it. This is why it helps to think of whiskers as part of a sensory toolkit, not as a magical substitute for eyes. Animals that use whiskers well are not choosing touch instead of vision. They are combining different senses, each one contributing what it does best. Eyes help with distance, shape, and broader layout. Ears help with sound and direction. Smell adds chemical information. And whiskers help with nearness, contact, and the quiet geometry of close space. Together, these senses create a fuller experience. That is one reason animals can move with such calm confidence in conditions that would leave us clumsy. They are not relying on one stream of information alone. They are blending several kinds of awareness, and whiskers are often part of that blend. There is also something gentle about the kind of knowledge whiskers provide in low light. They do not flood the animal with detail. They offer small corrections, small notices, small confirmations. Something is near. Something is narrowing. Something is brushing close. Something is safe to pass. That kind of information may seem modest, but it can transform movement. It can turn uncertainty into smoothness. It can let a body continue forward without panic, without sudden stops, without the sharp confusion that humans often feel in darkness. So when we imagine an animal moving through the dim edges of the world, whiskers are part of what makes that movement possible. They help the body trust the nearby space. They help closed surfaces become readable. They help darkness feel less empty and more textured. But whiskers do more than wait for direct contact in the dark. In some cases, they seem to notice changes before a surface is even touched. So what exactly can a whisker pick up from the space around it? The space around an animal is rarely still. Even in a quiet room, the air shifts. A body moves past. A surface interrupts a small current. A narrow opening changes how air flows through it. In the grass, in a tunnel, beside a wall, or near the ground, tiny motions are happening all the time. Most of them are too subtle for us to notice. But for an animal with sensitive whiskers, that nearby space can carry more information than it first seems. This is one of the most interesting things about whiskers. They do not only respond to direct contact, they can also respond to disturbance. That means a whisker can sometimes help an animal notice changes in the world before the face or body actually touches anything. A small movement in the air, a slight shift caused by something nearby, or a subtle change in the space around the head may be enough to bend a whisker just a little. And as soon as that whisker bends, the body has something to read. In that way, whiskers are not only tools for touch in the usual sense. They are also tools for sensing nearness. That difference matters. Direct contact tells an animal that something has already been reached. But if a whisker responds just before contact, the animal gains a brief moment of advance notice. That notice may be tiny, but tiny notices can be useful. They can help a head turn more smoothly. They can help a body slow down, angle slightly, or avoid pressing too far forward. A wall may alter the air just enough to matter. A moving body may disturb the space nearby. A branch or leaf may shift the tiny currents around the face. Even without a hard touch, the world can leave a faint signature. And whiskers are well placed to notice those signatures because they sit outward from the body. They stand at the edge of the face like fine, flexible probes, ready to respond to even small changes. Their lightness helps them move. Their rooted sensitivity helps the animal detect that movement. Together, those qualities let whiskers act as early receivers of nearby disturbance. This can be especially helpful in the kinds of environments where whiskers already matter most. In darkness, airflow may offer clues before direct contact arrives. In a narrow tunnel, the closeness of a wall can change the space around the face. Near another moving animal, motion itself may alter the air before the body is touched. In all of these cases, whiskers help make the nearby world feel less sudden. They soften the moment between not knowing and knowing. That is a quiet but important gift. We often imagine senses as very direct things. We see light, we hear sound, we touch a surface. But whiskers remind us that some forms of sensing are more delicate than that. Sometimes an animal is not detecting an object itself so much as detecting the small effect that object has on the space around it. That is a different kind of awareness. Less blunt, more atmospheric, more about traces than impacts, and it helps explain why whiskers can be so useful in places where uncertainty is high. The world does not have to strike the body hard to be noticed. It only has to leave enough of a disturbance for the whisker to move. There is something beautiful in that. A whisker does not need a loud signal. It can work with a whisper, a small push of air, a slight ripple of movement, a faint shift at the edge of the face. That sensitivity gives whiskers a role that feels a little broader than simple touch. They still belong to touch, of course. They are tactile tools, but they also help bridge the space between pure contact and the surrounding environment. They help an animal sense not just what has been touched, but what is close enough to begin making itself known. That is part of why whiskers feel so refined. They are not passive hairs waiting to be bumped. They are quiet instruments, always ready to register the small signs of nearness. And once we begin to think of whiskers this way, another fascinating behavior starts to make even more sense. Because some animals do not simply hold their whiskers in place and let the world come to them. They move them on purpose. They sweep them forward and back. They actively sample the space around them, as if gathering repeated bits of information from the air and from nearby surfaces. So whiskers are not only sensitive. In some animals, they are also part of a rhythm, a pattern of reaching outward, a gentle, repeated act of investigation. And that rhythm makes the sensory life of certain animals feel even more extraordinary. There are animals that do not simply wait for information to arrive. Instead, they reach out for it, not with a hand and not with a paw, but with a quiet sweeping motion of the whiskers, back and forth, forward and back, again and again, in a steady rhythm so small and quick that it often goes unnoticed by human eyes. This is called active whisking. It is one of the most fascinating parts of the whisker story, because it shows that whiskers are not always passive tools. In some animals, especially rodents like rats and mice, whiskers are moved on purpose during exploration. The animal is not merely reacting to the world, it is sampling it. That changes the feeling of whiskers completely. A passive whisker waits to be bent by whatever comes near. An actively whisking animal does something more deliberate. It sends the whiskers outward into the nearby space, as if lightly scanning the edges of the world. When a rat moves along a wall, enters a narrow opening, or pauses near an unfamiliar object, the whiskers may begin sweeping in a repeated rhythm. This movement can happen many times each second. To the animal, each sweep is a chance to gather new information. Each touch, each bend, each near contact adds another small clue. So instead of receiving just one moment of contact, the animal gets a series of them. A surface is here, still here, a little closer on this side, curved like this, open over there, too narrow here. In that way, active whisking helps create a richer picture of nearby space. It is somewhat like tracing the edge of an object with your fingertips, except it happens much faster, and with the face rather than the hand. Of course, it is not exactly the same as human touch. A rat is not consciously feeling around in the way we might imagine. But the basic idea is similar. Repeated contact gives repeated information, and repeated information helps improve accuracy. That matters a great deal in the kinds of places where rodents live. Small animals often move through cluttered, narrow, or hidden environments. Tunnels, roots, corners, nest spaces, cracks, tall grass, and crowded ground-level paths all create a world where the nearby layout matters constantly. In such a world, it is not enough to know that something is present. It helps to know exactly where it is, how far it extends, and whether the space ahead can be passed through safely. Active whisking helps answer those questions. It also makes the sensory life of these animals feel much more dynamic. A rat is not only seeing, hearing, and smelling its surroundings. It is also sending out these quick tactile sweeps, turning the immediate space around its face into a stream of fresh updates. That stream can be especially useful in low light. where visual details are limited. But even beyond darkness, active whisking helps with precision. The world close to the body is full of useful details, and whisking helps gather them quickly. It gives the animal a way to test the shape of the world before fully committing its body to a movement. That is a very elegant solution. Instead of stepping forward first and correcting later, the animal can gather some information in advance. The whiskers go out ahead, and the body follows with a little more confidence. There is something almost gentle about that rhythm. A repeated reaching outward. A soft conversation with walls, edges, openings, and surfaces. A continuous checking of what is near. And because the motion happens so quickly, it can support movement without slowing the animal too much. The animal does not have to stop and examine every detail in a dramatic way. It can keep moving, keep sampling, keep updating. That makes whiskers feel less like fixed sensors and more like moving tools of exploration. They are part of behavior, part of action, part of how an animal investigates the world around it. And in some ways, active whisking reminds us that sensing is not always passive. Sometimes perception involves reaching outward, testing, repeating, and refining. The world is not only received, it is gently examined. That idea brings us even closer to understanding the lives of rats and mice in particular. Because once you picture active whisking clearly, their everyday world begins to feel different from ours. A hallway, a tunnel, the edge of a wall, the opening beneath a root, the curve of a small object on the ground. All of these become part of a tactile landscape. Not a broad visual scene, not a distant panorama, but a close, detailed map built from tiny repeated contacts. And that makes the next step in the story feel especially natural. What does the world feel like for an animal that lives among edges, corners, tunnels, and narrow openings, and that reads so much of nearby space through the movement of its whiskers? For a small animal moving through tight places, every wall, gap, root, and opening matters. To a human, a room often feels open first and detailed second. We notice the larger space before we think about the edge of a table leg, the narrowness of a gap, or the exact curve of a corner near the floor. But for a rodent, the nearby world can matter just as much as the wider one, and often more. A rat or mouse lives close to surfaces. The ground is close. Walls are close. The edges of tunnels, cracks, burrows, grass stems, stones, roots, and hidden openings are all close. Life happens in a scale where a few inches can make the difference between shelter and exposure, safety and danger, a clear path and a blocked one. That is one reason whiskers are so useful to rodents. They help turn close space into something readable. A rodent does not need to understand a large landscape all at once in order to move well. What it often needs instead is a good sense of what is right around it. Is this opening wide enough? Does this wall continue? Is this edge curved or flat? Is there space to turn here? Is there something just ahead of the face? Whiskers help answer those questions. And because rodents often move quickly, that information has to be practical. It cannot be slow, abstract, or vague. It has to support movement in real time. A body moving through clutter or darkness needs immediate guidance, and whiskers are very good at providing exactly that kind of close-range update. This is where the idea of a tactile map begins to make sense. A map in this case, does not mean a picture in the mind the way we might imagine a paper drawing or a glowing digital screen. It means an organized sense of nearby structure. Through repeated whisker contact, and often through active whisking, rodents gather information about surfaces around them. Over time, and across many moments of movement, those small touches help create a usable understanding of the space. A tunnel has a certain width. A passage bends in a certain direction. A wall runs along one side. An opening appears here, but not there. A surface is rough. Another is smooth. These are not grand discoveries, but they do not need to be. For a small animal, such details are enough to shape motion, caution, and choice. And that is why rodent life can feel so tied to edges. Rats and mice often move along walls, through narrow spaces under cover, and beside structures. To us, this can look like cautious behavior, and it is. But it is also a sensory strategy. Edges provide information. They offer contact, guidance, and a kind of structure that open space does not. A wall can be followed. A tunnel can be read. A route can outline a path. Whiskers make those edges even more useful. They let the rodent notice how close a surface is, where it changes, and whether it continues. They help make narrow spaces navigable instead of confusing. They help turn clutter into pattern. That matters not only for movement, but for survival. A rodent often lives in environments where speed and caution must work together. Move too slowly, and danger increases. Move too carelessly, and mistakes happen. Whiskers help balance those needs. They support quick but informed movement, allowing the animal to keep going while still sampling the structure around it. There is something very refined about that. The rodent does not stop at every corner and stare. It does not pause for a long visual study of each path. It moves, and as it moves, it gathers tiny bits of information through whiskers. The environment becomes legible through contact, repetition, and nearness. That creates a world very different from the one humans usually experience. We often live visually first. We see across rooms, streets, and landscapes. Rodents, while still using vision and other senses, live much more intensely in the realm of immediate surfaces. Their world is rich with short-range detail, and whiskers help unlock that detail. A gap is not just a gap, it is a decision. A wall is not just a boundary, it is a guide. A tunnel is not just a hole, it is a space to be measured, entered, and understood. And whiskers are part of how that understanding happens. So when we imagine a rat moving undercover, or a mouse slipping through a narrow opening, we should not imagine an animal stumbling through guesswork. We should imagine an animal reading the close world with surprising skill, building a practical map from tiny contacts and repeated motions. Rodents show us one version of whisker use, life among close surfaces. But on the other end of the spectrum are animals using whiskers in a place where touch seems almost impossible to imagine in the same way. What happens when whiskers enter water? Water changes everything. It carries motion differently than air. It presses against the body more heavily. It flows, swirls, and holds movement in ways that can feel almost invisible to us. A fish darts past, and the water does not instantly forget. A body turns, and a trail of disturbance is left behind for a short while. In that strange moving world, whiskers take on one of their most remarkable roles. This is where marine mammals enter the story. Seals, sea lions, and walruses all have whiskers. But in water, these whiskers are doing more than the whiskers of a cat brushing a chair leg or a mouse tracing a tunnel wall. They are sensing motion in a medium that can carry very fine traces of what has already happened. That makes underwater whiskers feel almost magical at first. But they are not magic. They are a very refined sensory solution to life in a place where visibility is not always dependable and where movement leaves patterns behind in the water itself. For a seal, water is full of information. Currents move across the face. A fish changes direction. A swimming body leaves behind a disturbed path called a hydrodynamic trail, which is simply a pattern of motion left in the water after something has passed through it. That trail may be faint, but it is real. And with specialized whiskers, a seal can detect it. That means a seal does not always need to see a fish directly in order to gather useful information about it. The water itself can carry clues. This is one of the most astonishing things whiskers can do anywhere in the animal world. On land, whiskers help with nearness, edges, openings, and contact. In water, they can help detect trails of movement that remain after the moving animal is already gone. So a whisker, in this case, is not simply reading a solid object. It is reading a pattern left behind in a moving fluid. That may sound abstract at first, but the basic idea is simple. When something swims through water, it pushes water aside and creates a distinctive disturbance. That disturbance does not vanish at once. For a short time, it continues as a trail. If another animal is equipped to sense that trail, then the water becomes something like a record of recent motion. A seal's whiskers are especially well suited to this. They are not just ordinary facial hairs carried into the sea. They are specialized structures shaped and supported in ways that help them detect subtle water movement. When water flows around them, very small changes can be passed down to the sensitive root, just as movements in air or direct contact on land can be passed to the roots of whiskers in other animals. But in seals, the role feels especially dramatic because of what is being sensed. Not only an obstacle, not only a surface, but the movement of something unseen. A fish may have passed through moments earlier. The water may still hold the trace. The whiskers detect the pattern, and the seal gains information from it. In dark water, cloudy water, or deep water, that ability becomes incredibly useful. It turns water into a sensory landscape, a place where the recent past can still be felt. That is part of what makes marine whiskers so beautiful to think about. They remind us that sensing is not always about the obvious present moment. Sometimes an animal is reading what just happened. Sometimes the world offers not a clear picture, but a leftover signature. And whiskers are delicate enough to notice it. Sea lions and walruses also belong to this broader underwater whisker story, though different species use their whiskers in different ways and with different levels of specialization. But the larger idea stays the same. In the sea, whiskers become tools for reading motion, where sight may not be enough. That is very fitting, because water is a world where so much depends on movement. Currents shift, bodies glide, prey changes direction, light fades, and through all of that, Whiskers help marine mammals stay in contact with information that does not arrive through vision alone. There is something deeply calming about that image. A seal moving through dark water, not blind, not lost, not guessing, but sensing, reading, following faint disturbances with quiet precision. It is another reminder that the world is full of signals too subtle for human bodies to catch easily. Yet for other animals, those signals are part of ordinary life. A whisker bends, the root receives the motion, and the body gains one more clue about what is nearby, what has passed, and where to move next. That may be one of the most astonishing uses of whiskers anywhere in the animal world. But it also raises a broader question. How many different animals, in how many different environments, have quietly been depending on whiskers all along? Once you start noticing whiskers, they seem to appear almost everywhere in the mammal story. At first, whiskers can seem like a cat thing, or perhaps a mouse thing, or maybe, after a little more thought, a seal thing. But the longer you stay with the subject, the more widely whiskers begin to spread. They appear on hunters and hiders, swimmers and climbers, animals of forests, fields, tunnels, coastlines, and homes. They show up in the ordinary and the unusual. And that tells us something important right away. Whiskers are not a strange extra, carried by only a few special animals. They are a deeply useful sensory tool that many mammals have kept in one form or another. Cats are among the easiest place to begin because their whiskers are so visible. Their facial whiskers help with close-range awareness, hunting, and movement through tight or dim spaces. Dogs have whiskers too, though people sometimes notice them less. They grow around the muzzle and other parts of the face, and while dogs rely heavily on smell, their whiskers still add information about nearby contact and the space immediately around the head. Foxes carry whiskers into a more watchful wildlife. Like cats and dogs, they move through varied terrain and may need sensitive awareness when tracking prey, moving through brush, or navigating in low light. The exact details differ from species to species, but the principle stays familiar. When the nearby world matters, whiskers help make it clearer. Then there are otters. Otters are wonderful examples because they bring together land, water, play, hunting, and constant movement. Their whiskers help them detect what is close, especially when searching underwater, where visibility may be limited. In them, whiskers are not separate from the rest of life. They are part of a flowing, active body, moving through river currents, mud, stones, and prey-rich water. Shrews offer another version of the story. They are tiny mammals, often moving quickly through leaf litter, soil, roots, and undergrowth. In such a close and cluttered world, whiskers are a very practical sense. The smaller the body and the tighter the environment, the more useful it becomes to have fine tactile information at the edge of the face. Walruses take the idea in yet another direction. Their whiskers are famous for being thick and prominent. A walrus uses them while searching along the seafloor, where touch and close-range sensing can be more useful than vision alone. Here again, the same basic kind of structure appears, but now in a huge marine mammal, with a lifestyle completely different from that of a shrew or a house cat. That is what makes whiskers so interesting across mammals. The basic idea stays recognizable, but the lifestyle changes. A whisker on a cat helps with stalking, spacing, and close movement. A whisker on a dog adds nearby facial awareness. A whisker on an otter helps in water. A whisker on a shrew supports life in a tiny, crowded world. A whisker on a walrus helps with sensing near the seafloor. And we could keep going. There are whiskered mammals that climb, whiskered mammals that burrow, whiskered mammals that swim, whiskered mammals that hunt, and whiskered mammals that spend much of their lives trying not to be hunted. In each case, the surrounding world places slightly different demands on the body, and whiskers answer those demands in flexible ways. That flexibility is part of their strength. They are not useful only in one habitat or one way of life. They do not belong only to predators or only to small animals or only to land mammals. They are a sensory solution that can be adapted again and again because the basic problem they help solve is so common. How do you know what is close? How do you move safely when the world is tight, dark, cluttered, shifting, or difficult to see clearly? How do you sense the edge of things before your body presses too far into them? Those are broad problems, and mammals in many environments have faced them. Whiskers help answer them. That is why it makes sense to think of whiskers not as a niche oddity, but as a durable idea. A fine projecting hair connected to a sensitive root may seem modest, but it does a job that matters in many settings. It can help with walls, openings, prey, currents, tunnels, branches, rocks, and immediate space. It can support caution, accuracy, and smoother movement. And because it is so useful, evolution has had reason to keep it. The forms may differ, the lengths may differ, the density, stiffness, and exact placement may differ. But again and again, mammals return to the same general solution. Extend awareness a little farther than the skin itself. There is something very calming about that pattern. Across so many bodies and landscapes, the same quiet idea appears. Not because mammals are copying one another in any thoughtful way, but because certain problems invite certain elegant answers. That variety tells us whiskers are not a quirky extra. They are a durable solution to a common problem. How to know what is close when sight alone is not enough. And that usefulness may begin very early in life. For a very young animal, the world does not begin as a neat visual picture. It begins much closer than that, softer, darker, warmer, more immediate. To an adult human, it is easy to think of the world as something first understood through sight. We look across rooms, across streets, across landscapes. We expect to see before we touch. We expect detail to arrive from a distance. But early life is often not like that at all, especially for young mammals. Many begin life in nests, dens, burrows, sheltered corners, or against the body of a parent. These are close worlds. The important things are not far away. They are right there. A sibling pressed nearby. A wall of the nest. The body heat of the mother, fur, breath, milk. The edge of a resting place. The small boundary between shelter and exposure. In that kind of beginning, touch matters deeply. Even before a young animal fully understands the wider world, it can respond to nearness. It can sense contact, warmth, pressure, and the arrangement of bodies or surfaces around it. It does not need a broad visual map in order to begin orienting itself. It needs clues that are immediate and dependable. That is where whiskers begin to feel especially meaningful. A whisker is a close-range tool, and early life is a close-range experience. So even though a newborn mammal may still be developing in many ways, the basic value of whiskers is already easy to understand. They can help with orientation in a world where almost everything important is near the face and body. A young animal may not be thinking in any deliberate or reflective way, of course. It is not reasoning through the shape of its nest or making careful plans, but its body is still gathering information. The edge of a surface can matter. The presence of another body can matter. The difference between open space and a protected corner can matter. Whiskers can support that kind of immediate awareness. They help mark the near world. Something is here. Something is beside me. Something is above. Something is at the edge. That may sound simple, but for a very young creature, simplicity is enough. Early life often depends on basic forms of guidance, not grand understanding, but steady contact. Not wide knowledge, but local orientation. And that is one reason young mammals often seem to live in such a tactile way. They press into one another. They gather in warm spaces. They rest against fur, nesting material, or the side of a parent. Their world is full of surfaces, full of boundaries, full of small changes in pressure and position. The body learns the nearby world before it learns anything like distance in the adult sense. Whiskers fit naturally into that kind of life. They are not there to reveal far horizons. They are there to help with the small and immediate. The edge of a space, the closeness of a body, the shape of a surface, the difference between tucked inside and drifting away from safety. That is especially important because young animals are often vulnerable. They are small. Their movement may be limited. Their eyes may not yet be fully useful in the way adult eyes are. Their bodies depend heavily on staying in the right place, near warmth, near protection, near food, near the cluster of life that keeps them safe. In that setting, nearness is everything. And whiskers belong to nearness. They help connect the face to the close environment in a direct and steady way. They help turn nearby contact into information, even when the world is still dim, soft-edged, and only partly understood. There is something very gentle about that idea. Before speed, before skill, before hunting, before wide wandering, there is still touch, still contact, still the quiet awareness of what is just around the body, and whiskers take part in that awareness. Later in life, those same whiskers may help with tunnels, prey, branches, currents, and careful movement through darkness. But early on, their role may be much more intimate. They belong to the small geography of beginning life. Nest walls, parent bodies, safe surfaces, tiny movements through a close world. So whiskers are useful in the earliest quiet stages of life, and they remain useful long after. But for a sense this important, the brain must be giving it real attention. How much of the mind is devoted to such a tiny structure? It can feel surprising that something so fine could command meaningful space in the brain. A whisker is only a hair, after all. Thin, light, easy to miss. It does not roar like a voice or flash like a bright color. It does not seem large enough to shape the inner life of an animal in any major way. But in some animals, whiskers matter enough that the brain gives them careful, organized attention. That alone tells us something important. Whiskers are not a minor extra sense sitting quietly at the edge of experience. For animals that depend on them, whiskers are part of how the world is understood. And when a source of information becomes important enough, the brain responds. It makes room for it. It builds systems around it. It learns how to interpret it with speed and precision. This is especially clear in rodents. Rats and mice do not use whiskers casually. Their whiskers are deeply involved in how they explore closed spaces, edges, openings, and surfaces. Because of that, the signals coming from whiskers are not treated as random little events. They are processed in an organized way. One of the most famous examples of this is something called the barrel cortex. That name may sound unusual, but the idea behind it is simple. In part of the rodent brain, whisker input is arranged in a very striking pattern. Different whiskers connect to different little processing units, creating a kind of organized map. So the brain is not just receiving whisker information in a vague blur. It is keeping track of where that information is coming from. That is remarkable. It means the whiskers are important enough for the brain to sort them carefully. A touch on one whisker is not exactly the same as a touch on another. A signal from the left side is not the same as a signal from the right. A movement at the upper part of the whisker field is not identical to a movement at the lower part. The brain preserves some of that structure because structure matters. Location matters. Pattern matters. This helps explain how whiskers can contribute so much to movement and awareness. If the brain treated all whisker contact as one general message, like something touched the face, that would still be useful to a point. But careful organization allows much more than that. It allows the animal to gather richer information about position, direction, and the layout of nearby space. In other words, the brain helps turn whisker signals into a usable model of the close world. That model is not a picture in the way humans often think about pictures. It is not like a painting hanging inside the mind. It is more practical than that. It is a working sense of where things are, how they are arranged, and how the body should move in response. And repeated whisker use strengthens that importance. An animal that is constantly touching walls, sweeping whiskers near objects, testing openings, and gathering information from close surfaces is giving the brain a steady stream of data. Over time, it makes sense that the brain would become highly prepared to handle that stream well. What is used often becomes important. What is important becomes organized. That is why whiskers are not peripheral for these animals. They are central. For a rodent exploring a narrow passage, whisker input may be one of the main ways the nearby world is being monitored. The brain does not treat that as background noise. It treats it as valuable information about survival, motion, and control. There is something deeply elegant in that relationship. A fine hair bends. A tiny signal travels inward. And somewhere inside the brain, that event is given shape, place, and meaning. The outer world presses in, softly and briefly. The inner world responds with structure. That is a beautiful example of how bodies and brains work together. The whisker alone is not enough. The brain alone is not enough either. One gathers the signal, the other makes sense of it. Together, they create a system capable of turning small physical contacts into useful knowledge. This also reminds us that importance in biology is not measured by size alone. A mountain can be large and far away, but a whisker can still matter more in a given moment if it helps an animal judge the edge of a tunnel, avoid a collision, or track the exact position of something close by. The brain understands that. It invests in what is useful. So the whisker may look tiny from the outside, but in some animals it carries enough value to shape the organization of the mind itself. That makes whiskers feel even less like decoration than before. They are not just noticeable on the face. They are represented deep within the nervous system. And if the brain invests that much in whiskers, then losing or damaging them must matter. So what happens when a whisker falls out, breaks, or disappears for a while? Like other hairs, whiskers can be shed or broken, but because they are sensory tools, their loss carries a little more weight. It helps to begin with a simple idea. A whisker is still a hair. That means it does not last forever. Over time, whiskers can naturally fall out and be replaced. This is a normal part of life. Just as fur sheds and grows again, whiskers can do the same. So finding a whisker on the floor from time to time is not always a reason for concern. Sometimes it is simply part of the body renewing itself. But even though this is normal, a whisker is not the same as an ordinary hair. When an ordinary hair falls out, the effect is usually minor. When a whisker falls out, something more meaningful is missing for a while. A small piece of sensory reach is gone. A little stream of information has been interrupted. Not enough to leave an animal helpless, but enough to matter. That is why it helps to think about whisker loss in two different ways. There is natural shedding, and there is damage. Natural shedding is part of the normal cycle of growth and replacement. A single whisker may fall out and later regrow. Because animals usually have many whiskers working together, the loss of one whisker is often manageable. The system still has other points of contact and other ways of gathering information. Damage is different. A whisker may break. It may be bent sharply. It may be cut or trimmed by a person who does not realize what it is for. In those cases, the problem is not simply that a hair is gone. The problem is that a sensory tool has been reduced or altered before the body intended it. That matters because whiskers help with close-range confidence. They help an animal judge nearness, movement, and position. So when whiskers are missing or damaged, the animal may lose some of the fine detail it normally receives from the space around its face and body. The world may become a little less clear at close range. Not dark, not unreadable, but slightly less precise. That loss of precision can show up in subtle ways. An animal may be a little less confident moving through tight spaces. It may hesitate more. It may rely more heavily on other senses or on slower movement. The change may not always be dramatic, especially if only a few whiskers are involved. But the point is not that an animal becomes helpless. The point is that information has been reduced, and information matters. That is the heart of this whole section. When whiskers are lost, the effect is not mainly about appearance. A cat does not lose beauty because a whisker falls out. A dog does not become strange because a few whiskers break. The important change is functional. Something that was helping the animal sense nearby space is no longer helping in quite the same way. This is especially useful to remember with familiar animals like cats. Because cat whiskers are so visible, people sometimes treat them as if they were decorative, like eyebrows in a drawing or flourishes around the face. But whiskers are not ornaments. They are part of the cat's equipment for moving through the world. That is why trimming them is not a harmless beauty change. It removes part of the cat's sensory system. Even if the whiskers later regrow, the period without them still matters. That said, the body is not fragile in a simple way. Animals are often adaptable. They still have eyes, ears, memory, body position, and the rest of their senses. A lost whisker does not erase all awareness. It only reminds us that awareness is made of many parts, and whiskers are one of them. There is something strangely revealing about that. A fallen whisker lying on the floor or caught in a blanket looks so small. It can seem almost weightless, almost meaningless. But once you know what a whisker does, it no longer feels like a random hair. It feels like a tiny sensor that was once part of a much larger conversation between body and world. And that changes how you see it. A lost whisker becomes evidence. Evidence that these structures are not ornamental. Evidence that the body had invested in them. Evidence that even fine, quiet things can have important jobs. So whiskers can fall out. They can regrow. They can be damaged. They can be missing for a while. And in each case, what matters most is not the look of the face, but the flow of information. A lost whisker reminds us that these structures are functional, not ornamental. And once we see them that way, it becomes natural to ask a deeper question. Where did whiskers come from in the first place? Before whiskers became familiar to us on the face of a house cat, sensitive hairs were already part of a much older animal story. To understand whiskers more deeply, it helps to step back from the living room, the garden, the tunnel, and the shoreline, and think instead about early mammal life. Not modern pets, not modern rodents, not seals in dark water, but small ancient animals trying to survive in a world full of risk. That world was not easy. For many early mammals, life may have favored caution. Small bodies are vulnerable. Darkness can be both a shelter and a danger. Dense ground cover, burrows, roots, narrow spaces, and nighttime movement all create a world where close-range information becomes very important. And that is exactly the kind of world where sensitive hairs would be useful. If an animal lives partly in darkness or in hidden spaces, then sight alone cannot do all the work. Vision is valuable, of course, but it becomes less dependable when light is poor or when the body is moving through cluttered spaces where distant seeing matters less than immediate awareness. In those conditions, any structure that helps detect nearness would offer an advantage. A fine projecting hair connected to a sensitive root could do that. It could help an animal notice a wall before its face hit it. It could help judge whether an opening was safe to enter. It could help detect what was close in places where the eyes could not see clearly. It could add quiet information in moments where hesitation or error might have serious consequences. That is one reason whiskers make so much sense as an ancient sensory adaptation. They do not require a huge body. They do not require bright light. They do not depend on open space. They are useful in the small, shadowed, immediate world where many early mammals likely spent much of their time. And once a structure like that begins helping survival, natural selection has a reason to keep it. That is the simple heart of evolution. Helpful traits tend to remain, not because nature plans ahead, and not because bodies are trying to become elegant, but because useful features support survival and reproduction. Over long stretches of time, traits that work well often stay, and sometimes they become more refined. Whiskers seem to fit that pattern beautifully. They offer real sensory value. They help with navigation, protection, and close-range awareness. They are lightweight and efficient, and they can serve many purposes without requiring dramatic changes to the whole body. That makes them the kind of feature evolution would be likely to preserve. There is also something fitting about whiskers being associated with mammals in particular. Mammals are deeply tied to touch in many ways. Fur itself is a mammalian feature. Warm bodies, close parental care, nests, dens, and the tactile experience of early life all belong strongly to the mammal story. Whiskers feel like a natural extension of that broader sensitivity. They are not separate from the mammalian body plan. They grow out of it. A body already covered in hair could, over time, develop specialized hairs that do more than insulate. Some hairs could become more useful for sensing. Some positions on the face could become especially important. Some follicles could become more sensitive. Little by little, what began as hair could become a refined tactile instrument. That idea feels quiet, but powerful. Whiskers are not some strange invention added later for dramatic effect. They are a logical refinement of the mammalian body, a way of turning part of the body's surface into a more sensitive edge. And once that edge proved useful, it could be shaped further by the demands of real life. A burrowing animal would benefit one way, a hunter another way, a swimmer another way still. But before all those later differences, the deeper story may have been the same. Life close to danger, life close to surfaces, life where knowing what is near matters greatly. That is the world whiskers belong to. Darkness, caution, narrow spaces, sudden contact, the need to move with a little more confidence than sight alone can provide. Seen that way, whiskers do not feel like a minor detail on the face of modern animals. They feel ancient. They feel like one of those quiet solutions life arrived at long ago and kept because it worked. A projecting hair, a sensitive root, a small extension of awareness at the edge of the body. Simple in appearance, lasting in value. Evolution helps explain why whiskers stayed, but it also helps explain why they diversified. Once a sensory tool proves useful, different animals begin shaping it in different directions. So how does lifestyle change the job a whisker has to do? A whisker on a hunter is not quite the same as a whisker on a burrower, and neither is quite the same as a whisker in open water. By now, whiskers may already feel familiar. We have seen them on cats, rodents, seals, and many other mammals. We have seen how they help with nearness, contact, airflow, and movement. But once a sensory tool becomes useful, it rarely stays exactly the same in every animal. Different ways of living begin to shape it. That is why whiskers are best understood not as one single thing with one single purpose, but as a flexible system that different animals use in different ways. A predator, for example, often needs precision at the final moment. A cat stalking prey does not only need to know that something is nearby, it needs to know exactly where it is. Very close movement matters. Tiny shifts matter. The position of the prey near the mouth, the paws, or the face matters. In those moments, whiskers help with fine tracking at close range. They support the kind of precision a hunter needs when success depends on timing and exact placement. For predators, whiskers can also help with movement through cluttered spaces while stalking quietly. A body moving through grass, around furniture, through brush, or beside the ground benefits from advance notice about nearby surfaces. Hunting is not only about the prey, it is also about avoiding mistakes, noise, and awkward contact on the way there. A prey animal may use whiskers differently. For an animal more often hunted than hunting, the world may need to be read with caution. Whiskers can help with spacing, edge awareness, and close environmental detail. A mouse slipping along a wall, entering a tunnel, or moving through a narrow opening benefits from knowing exactly how close the surfaces are. In that case, whiskers support safe movement, quick decisions, and a better understanding of escape routes and shelter. So the predator's whiskers may serve the moment of capture. The prey animal's whiskers may serve the moment of avoidance. Both are using the same general kind of tool, but the pressure of life pushes that tool toward different practical needs. Burrowing animals show another version of the same pattern. In tunnels and underground passages, the nearby world matters almost constantly. Walls are close, ceilings are close, openings may narrow suddenly, turns come quickly. In such places, whiskers become deeply useful for maintaining orientation. They help an animal sense the boundaries of a passage and move through it with confidence. For a burrower, whiskers are less about dramatic events and more about constant close guidance. That is one of the quiet truths about sensory evolution. The same structure can be shaped by repeated daily needs, not only by rare moments of danger. If an animal spends much of its life moving through tight spaces, then whiskers become part of the ordinary rhythm of survival. Not exciting, not unusual, just necessary. And then there are the specialists of water. A seal using whiskers to detect hydrodynamic trails is relying on the same basic principle of sensitive hairs connected to sensitive roots. But the job has changed in a striking way. Instead of sensing walls, branches, or tunnel edges, the whiskers are reading water movement left behind by something else. That is a very different environment and a very different kind of information. The whisker system has been carried into a new medium and shaped for a new challenge. This is why it helps to think not just about whisker anatomy, but about whisker behavior. What does the animal do with the information once it receives it? How does it move? What kind of world does it enter each day? What problems must it solve again and again? A whisker is not meaningful on its own. It becomes meaningful inside a life. Inside a hunter's life, it may support stalking and capture. Inside a prey animal's life, it may support caution and escape. Inside a burrower's life, it may support constant orientation. Inside a swimmer's life, it may support the reading of subtle trails in water. That is what makes whiskers so beautiful across species. They are not frozen in one role. They adapt. They remain recognizable, but their importance shifts with lifestyle. The body keeps the same general invention, and life teaches it new uses. So when we look across the mammal world, we are not seeing one single whisker story repeated over and over. We are seeing a shared sensory idea reshaped by hunting, hiding, burrowing, climbing, and swimming. A small projecting hair, a sensitive root, and then, around that simple design, an entire way of life. By now, whiskers can seem almost invisible in the best possible way, so useful that they disappear into the normal rhythm of life. But they do not only help animals detect the world. Sometimes they also help reveal what the animal itself is feeling. A face is not only a place where information comes in, it is also a place where inner state quietly shows itself. By now, we have spent a long time thinking about whiskers as tools of sensation. They help animals detect space, movement, contact, airflow, and nearby change. They are part of how the world becomes readable. But whiskers do not only receive information. On many animals, especially familiar ones like cats, they also seem to show something back. They become part of expression. This is easy to notice even before we fully understand it. A cat resting calmly often has a different whisker position from a cat that is sharply focused on something. A curious face can look different from a frightened one. A soft, sleepy face can look different from a tense, defensive face. And while the eyes, ears, posture, and tail all play a role in that, the whiskers help shape the whole impression. That is because whiskers can shift with mood, attention, and state of readiness. When an animal is alert or investigating something closely, the whiskers may move more forward. This makes sense when you remember that whiskers are sensory tools. If something ahead deserves attention, moving the whiskers forward can bring those tools into a more useful position. The face seems to lean into the world a little more. We often see this in cats. A cat watching a sound, staring at a toy, inspecting a new object, or focusing on possible prey may carry its whiskers more forward. Even if the movement is small, it changes the whole feeling of the face. The cat appears interested, present, concentrated. The face looks sharper, as though it is gathering itself around the moment. But whiskers do not always move forward. In situations of discomfort, fear, tension, or defensiveness, they may draw back more closely against the face. Again, this is not happening in isolation. The ears may change position too. The eyes may narrow or widen. The body may stiffen, crouch, or pull away. The whiskers become one part of a broader physical pattern that tells us the animal is not relaxed. That is important. A whisker position alone does not tell the whole emotional story. It belongs to a larger body language system. The face, body, tail, posture, and motion all work together. But whiskers are part of that system in a way many people instinctively notice, even if they cannot explain exactly why. Perhaps that is because whiskers are so visible. They extend outward from the face, making subtle changes easier to see than changes happening deeper in the muscles. A small shift forward or back can alter the whole outline of the face. It changes not only how the animal senses, but how the animal seems. And this is one reason cats feel so expressive to people. Their whiskers are large enough to notice. Their faces are already easy to read, and their behavior often invites close attention. A cat sitting in a window, pausing by a doorway, or focusing on something near the floor can seem almost thoughtful. The whiskers contribute to that impression. They help turn the face into something dynamic, something responsive, something that appears to be taking in the world and reacting to it in real time. Dogs, foxes, and other mammals can show similar patterns, though people most often notice it in cats because cat whiskers are especially clear and prominent. But the broader idea remains the same. Whiskers are not just passive structures. Their position can reflect what the animal is doing and, to some extent, what state it is in. That gives them a double role. They help gather information, and they help display orientation toward the world. Forward may suggest interest. Back may suggest unease. Neutral may suggest calm. Not always perfectly, and not in every single case, but often enough that whiskers become part of the visible language of the face. There is something very beautiful about that. A sensory tool becomes an expressive one. A structure that helps read the world also helps show how the world is being met. That may be why people are so drawn to whiskers. They do useful work, but they also seem alive with feeling. They make the face appear more attentive, more delicate, more emotionally present. They remind us that sensing and expression are not fully separate things. The same face that receives the world also reveals a relationship to it. And perhaps that is why a whiskered face can feel so memorable. It looks as though it is not only existing, but experiencing. Not only resting, but noticing. Not only moving, but responding. This may be one reason people find whiskers so expressive. We are not only seeing a sensory tool, we are watching a face that seems to be thinking, feeling, and responding. And that brings us gently toward the human side of the story. People tend to notice whiskers almost immediately, even when they do not know much about what whiskers do. That is an interesting thing on its own. A person may know very little about whisker anatomy, or about active whisking in rodents, or about seals reading trails in water, and still feel that whiskers matter. They may look at a cat, a dog, a fox, or even a drawing of an animal, and the whiskers stand out right away. The face seems more complete with them, more expressive, more alive. Part of that is simple visibility. Whiskers project outward from the face in clean, fine lines. They catch the eye because they interrupt the smooth outline of the head. Instead of the face ending neatly at the fur, whiskers extend beyond it. They create a kind of frame around the muzzle and cheeks. They make the face seem to reach slightly into the space around it. That alone gives them visual power. A tiny feature can become very noticeable if it changes the shape of a familiar face. And whiskers do exactly that. They help define where the face feels soft, alert, delicate, or focused. Even from a little distance, they can sharpen the impression an animal makes. They also make expression easier to read. A whiskered face often appears more detailed than a face without them. Not because whiskers are large, but because they give us extra lines to notice. Forward whiskers can make a face seem interested or attentive. Relaxed whiskers can make it seem calm. Drawn back whiskers can make the face feel more tense or guarded. Even when people do not consciously think about these shifts, they still respond to them. The face begins to feel more readable. That may be one reason whiskers are so emotionally visible to us. Humans are strongly drawn to faces. We look for eyes, mouths, brows, and all the small signs that help us understand mood and intention. When an animal has clear whiskers, those whiskers become part of the face reading process too. They add to the sense that the animal is not just present, but engaged with the world. Whiskers also seem to carry certain associations. People often connect them with alertness. A whiskered face can look attentive, as though it is noticing something just beyond our own awareness. At the same time, whiskers can also make an animal seem gentle. Soft fur, quiet lines, and a calm face framed by whiskers often create a feeling of delicacy. In other cases, whiskers can suggest age or wisdom, especially in older animals or in drawings where long whiskers are used to suggest maturity and character. So whiskers are not neutral in the human imagination. They gather meaning very quickly. They can make a face seem wise, sleepy, careful, curious, mischievous, or tender, even before we think much about why. Familiarity plays a role too. Humans live closely with certain whiskered mammals, especially cats and dogs. We see their faces often. We learn their moods through repetition. Over time, whiskers become part of the emotional vocabulary of those animals. We do not just see them as hairs, we see them as part of the face we know. That emotional familiarity can spread outward. A fox may seem expressive to us partly because it reminds us of facial patterns we already understand from other mammals. A drawing of a small whiskered animal can feel instantly readable, even if it is highly simplified. A few lines added to a face are enough to make it seem more alive, more specific, more emotionally present. That is a remarkable thing. A sensory tool used by animals for detecting the nearby world also becomes a visual cue that helps humans detect feeling, personality, and character. So whiskers live in two worlds at once. For the animal, they are practical. For the human observer, they are practical and emotional. They help the animal sense nearness, contact, and movement. And they help us sense something about the animal itself. That double role may be one of the reasons whiskers stay so memorable. They belong to biology, but they do not stay there. They cross easily into feeling. They become part of how we imagine animals, how we draw them, how we describe them, and how we remember them. A whiskered face is easy to care about, easy to notice, easy to read, and easy to carry in memory long after the animal has moved on. Once something becomes emotionally visible, it rarely stays confined to biology alone. It slips into drawings, stories, symbols, and memory. So how did whiskers become part of culture as well as nature? A whisker is small enough to miss in passing, yet distinctive enough to become symbolic once a culture notices it. That is true of many little details in the natural world. At first, they are simply there. Then, over time, people begin to attach feeling to them. They become part of memory, part of storytelling, part of the way a creature is recognized and imagined. Whiskers have followed that path very easily. One reason is that whiskers are visually efficient. A few simple lines can change a face completely. Add whiskers to a drawing, and suddenly the face feels more animal, more alert, more expressive. They help identify a cat quickly, of course, but they also help suggest mood and character. A whiskered face can seem wise, curious, delicate, sleepy, nervous, playful, or sly, depending on the shape of the eyes, the tilt of the head, and the angle of those fine lines. That makes whiskers very useful in art and illustration. Artists often rely on small features that do a great deal of work. Whiskers are one of those features. They do not take up much space, but they tell the viewer a lot. They frame the face. They suggest sensitivity. They sharpen expression. They make a character feel more complete. That is true in realistic art, but perhaps even more true in simplified art. In cartoons, storybooks, children's drawings, logos, and character design, whiskers often become visual shorthand. A few marks on either side of the face are enough to say animal, enough to say cat, enough to say soft but alert, enough to give the character presence. Even when the body is stylized or exaggerated, whiskers keep the face grounded in a familiar kind of life. And once whiskers become part of visual shorthand, they begin to gather meaning. They can make a character seem older or wiser, especially if the whiskers are long and noticeable. They can make a creature seem delicate or gentle, because whiskers are so fine and light. They can also make an animal seem comical, especially when the whiskers are oversized, uneven, twitching, or paired with exaggerated expression. That range is part of what makes whiskers so interesting in the human imagination. They are not tied to just one emotional tone. They can signal calm. They can signal dignity. They can signal fussiness, surprise, or mischief. They can make a face look thoughtful, almost as if the animal is pausing to consider the world. That is why whiskers often remain in stories even when strict realism does not. A storyteller or artist may simplify many details of an animal, but keep the whiskers because they carry so much character. They help the audience feel that this is not just a body moving through space. This is a creature with awareness, a creature with mood, a creature whose face seems to register experience. In folklore and imagination more broadly, whiskers often become linked with sensitivity, perception, age, or animal nature itself. They sit at the edge of the face, where the body meets the world. So it is not surprising that people come to see them as signs of awareness. A whiskered creature can seem more tuned in, more responsive, more alive to subtle change. There is also something domestic and familiar about whiskers for many people. A cat in a window, a dog lifting its nose, a pet resting in evening light. Whiskers belong to these small household memories, and because of that, they slip very easily into warm emotional space. They become part of comfort, routine, and the ordinary beauty of animals living near us. In art, that familiarity can make whiskers feel instantly tender. So whiskers move through culture in several ways at once. They are a practical drawing tool. They are a marker of species. They are an emotional cue. They are a symbol of sensitivity, age, or character. And all of that grows out of something that began as a sensory structure on the face of a mammal. There is something very lovely in that transformation. A biological feature becomes an artistic one. A tactile instrument becomes a symbol. A few hairs designed to detect the nearby world become part of how humans imagine gentleness, cleverness, caution, or quiet intelligence. By this point, whiskers have carried us from anatomy to emotion, from water trails to folklore. and yet they remain what they always were. Tiny sensors at the edge of the body. What does it mean that so much knowledge can rest in something so small? There is something quietly beautiful about a tool that does not dominate the body, but extends it just enough to make the nearby world clearer. That may be one of the best ways to think about whiskers now, after spending so much time with them. They do not transform an animal into something dramatic or strange. They do not announce themselves with size, color, or noise. They simply reach a little farther than the skin does, a little farther into the air, a little farther toward a wall, a branch, a tunnel, a ripple, or a moving body. And in doing so, they help make the nearby world more knowable. Whiskers are subtle extensions of perception. They do not replace the eyes, the ears, or the nose. They do not take over the whole work of sensing, but they add something very important. They help the body feel where it meets the world, and even where it is about to meet the world. That makes them feel like a bridge between the animal and its surroundings. Not a large bridge, a very fine one, but a meaningful one. At one end is the body, warm and alive, moving through space. At the other is the environment, full of surfaces, gaps, currents, edges, and motion. And between the two is the whisker, receiving the small signs that pass from one into the other. That is part of why whiskers can seem so elegant. They work with almost nothing. A slight bend, a faint current of air, a light touch against the surface, a narrow opening near the face, a small disturbance in water. From those tiny events, whiskers help create guidance. They allow an animal to move more gently, more safely, and more precisely than it otherwise could. A body with whiskers does not need to press into the world blindly. It can sense a little ahead of itself. It can adjust before impact. It can gather clues from nearness before nearness becomes collision. That makes movement smoother. A cat passing through furniture, a mouse slipping along the edge of a tunnel, a seal sensing what moved through the water before it. In each case, the whiskers make the world feel slightly less sudden. That is a lovely gift for a sensory tool to offer. Not spectacle, not drama, just a reduction in surprise. A little more warning, a little more softness, a little more precision. And those small benefits matter deeply. Life is full of moments where a slight improvement in awareness changes everything. A surface is avoided. A gap is judged correctly. A movement is understood in time. A path becomes easier to follow. A face is protected. A body continues without panic. Whiskers help with all of that, not by overpowering the environment, but by listening closely to it. That listening can take different forms. Sometimes it is direct touch. Sometimes it is airflow. Sometimes it is repeated whisking against nearby objects. Sometimes it is the reading of movement through water. But in every case, the deeper idea is the same. Whiskers help turn tiny forces into useful knowledge. That makes them feel like one of nature's most refined, quiet inventions. Not because they are complicated in appearance, but because they are so efficient. A fine projecting hair connected to a sensitive root can do an astonishing amount of work. It can support hunting, hiding, burrowing, swimming, orientation, and expression. It can help with both the practical business of movement and the emotional visibility of the face. It can be part of survival, and part of beauty too. There is also something almost philosophical about whiskers. They remind us that life is not guided only by what can be seen clearly from far away. Sometimes the most important knowledge is local, subtle, and immediate. Sometimes what matters most is not the horizon, but the branch just ahead, the wall beside the body, the opening in front of the nose, the current left behind in water, the edge of contact before contact fully arrives. Whiskers belong to that scale of knowing, the scale of the near world, the soft world, the world of tiny pressures and quiet corrections. And perhaps that is why whiskers feel so memorable. They remind us that life is often guided not only by what can be seen clearly, but by what can be sensed softly. So after everything we have explored tonight, what kind of world do whiskers reveal? By the end of tonight, whiskers no longer feel like a minor detail on the face of an animal. They feel more like one of the quiet ways life reaches outward. At the beginning, they may have seemed simple. A few fine hairs on the muzzle of a cat, a familiar part of a mouse's face, a small detail on a fox, a dog, or a seal. Easy to notice, but easy to underestimate. Now they feel different. Now they feel like instruments. Not loud instruments, and not dramatic ones, but finely made tools for sensing the nearby world. Whiskers are specialized tactile hairs, built not just to sit on the face, but to gather information. They extend awareness a little farther than the skin itself. They let the world touch the body gently and early before full contact arrives. And most remarkably, they do not sense at the tip. The visible hair is only the outer part. The true sensitivity lies at the root, hidden beneath the skin, where nerves and specialized structures turn tiny movements into signals the body can understand. A whisker bends, and the body receives a message. Something is here. Something is close. Something has shifted. From there, the story widened. We saw that some animals do not wait for whiskers to be touched by chance. Rats and mice move their whiskers back and forth in active exploration, gathering repeated samples from the nearby world. Their whiskers help them read corners, tunnels, edges, and openings. Closed space becomes something they can examine almost continuously, not with hands, but with a quiet rhythm at the edge of the face. Then the story widened again. In water, whiskers became even more astonishing. A seal moving through dark or cloudy water can detect disturbances left behind by something that passed through moments earlier. The water itself remembers for a little while, and the whiskers help read that memory. That means whiskers are not only tools of direct touch. In some animals, they are tools for detecting traces, motion, and subtle patterns that linger in the environment. By then, whiskers were no longer just about cats. They had become part of a much larger mammal story. They appeared on hunters, prey animals, burrowers, swimmers, climbers, and creatures of many different habitats. Again and again, the same basic idea returned: a fine hair, a sensitive root, and a better sense of what is near when sight alone is not enough. That is one of the deepest truths whiskers reveal. The world is full of tiny forces, tiny bends, tiny currents, tiny pressures, tiny disturbances in air and water. Most of them are too subtle for us to notice without tools. Yet many animals live inside that delicate layer of reality all the time. For them, The nearby world is rich with faint information. A wall changes the air. A tunnel edge brushes the face. A moving body leaves a wake. A branch approaches the eye. A narrow opening either welcomes the body or turns it away. Whiskers help make those small signals legible. And because of that, they become tools of darkness, caution, movement, and survival. They help a body move with more softness and precision. They help transform uncertainty into guidance. They make the world feel less sudden. There is something beautiful in that. Whiskers do not conquer the world. They listen to it. They do not force clarity. They gather it gently. They remind us that perception is not always grand or obvious. Sometimes it arrives through the lightest touch, the faintest shift, the smallest change at the edge of the body. That may be why whiskers feel so memorable in the end. They are useful, yes. They are anatomical, yes. They are part of evolution, behavior, and the sensory life of mammals. But they are also a quiet symbol of something larger. That awareness can be delicate. That intelligence can begin in subtle contact. That the world often reaches us through hints before it reaches us through certainty. A cat moving through a dim hallway. A mouse pausing at the mouth of a tunnel. A seal drifting through dark water. Each one is meeting a world that is not only seen but felt. Not only obvious but layered. Not only visible but full of soft signals waiting to be read. And with that, we can leave the animal world to its quiet sensing. A face moves through darkness, air stirs, water remembers, and somewhere at the edge of the body, a whisker bends.